Hello everyone! Today I have a sewing tutorial to share, or more specifically, a tutorial on my preferred method of hemming skirts. I've gone over this process briefly in making of videos before, but I wanted to go through the process in a little more detail since I do get questions about it from time to time. For this process you need the basic sewing tools, like a ruler, scissors, thread, a marking pencil or chalk, pins, and needles. You also need a skirt with a straight edge that is in need of hemming. Step 1 is marking a line 1 inch away from the bottom edge of the fabric. Then fold the edge up so it touches that line and pin it in place. I'd recommend doing this if you're new to sewing or using a stiff fabric that doesn't iron nicely. But I've been doing this for a while and I know what a 1/2 inch looks like, so I'm going to fold this edge inward by eye. And since I'm using a really lightweight cotton, I can turn this edge inward as I iron and save myself a few minutes of pinning. But for stubborn fabrics and when I was starting out, I would measure and pin during this step, and I would recommend that you do the same. Iron across this edge so the fabric is neatly folded inward by a 1/2 inch, and if you're using pins, then remove them as you go. For stubborn fabrics, you can use steam or water to make this edge sharper. Now it's time to fold that edge inward again so the raw edge is hidden, and this is done using the same method, marking a line on the wrong side of the fabric, twice the width of your desired hem away from the bottom edge of the material. Since this is a historical project, I'm making my hem quite wide at 2¼ inches, which means I'm measuring 4½ inches away from the edge. After the line is drawn, bring the bottom edge of the material inward so it touches that line. Then pin it down. I'm actually cheating a bit. Since this fabric has lines running horizontally, I can use those as a guide for the hem instead of marking a new line. I would recommend pinning the entire hem before you start sewing, since it's annoying to have to stop and pin more as you go. But this does come down to personal preference and how many pins you have around. Now it's time for sewing. The stitch I'm using today is usually called a catch stitch or a cross stitch, which looks pretty fancy from the inside and is hidden from the right side. Start off by threading your needle and knotting the end of the thread. Then bring the needle through the portion of the fabric that is folded inward. You want to move a 1/2 inch over and down from the starting point, then stitch through the portion of the fabric that is folded inward. The stitch should go towards your start point and you only need to pick up a few threads. Pull the thread taut, then move up and over a 1/2 inch. Bring the needle through a few threads at the front layer of fabric, just above where the portion folded inward ends. Once again, the needle and stitch should be going towards the point you started at, otherwise you won't get the cross effect. Pull the thread taut and the process repeats. Move a 1/2 inch over and down, then make a stitch through the portion of the fabric that folds inward. Remember that the stitch should not be visible from the right side of the fabric, you're only going through the layer folded inward. And of course this stitch is facing the point you started at. Now we go up and over and make a small stitch through the fabric. This stitch does go through the front layer fabric, which means it will be visible. So try and keep it as small as possible by only catching a few threads. And that's about it. Just keep going and try and keep the stitches even. The big key here is that you are stitching towards the point you started, even though you are moving away from that point. It isn't very intuitive, but once you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy. Something that may help is starting from the left side of the fabric. Then you know each stitch should be going towards your left/non-dominant hand. And if you're left-handed, starting from the right side would be equally helpful. And make sure to check the front side of the fabric throughout this process to make sure the stitches are hidden. Really quickly, I want to talk a bit about why I hand sew hems as opposed to machine sewing them. Personally, I just prefer the finish. I don't like visible top stitching on costumes unless it is intentional and adds to the garment. Sometimes I do it to save time, but when I'm making historical projects or something really elaborate, I feel like hand finishes with hidden stitches are the way to go. And when you hem by machine, you have a visible line of stitches on the top side of the fabric. If you're using a blind hemming foot, the stitching will be less obvious, but it's a finicky process and sometimes a crease is left where the stitches are. So I'm not a big fan of that either. Plus I love hemming by hand. I find it really relaxing and enjoyable. When you're all done, knot the thread and clip any loose threads. Make sure all the pins are removed, then iron the hem from the top side of the fabric. If the material is stubborn, then use water or steam to get everything nice and sharp. And that's it! The hem is finished, and if all was done properly, the stitches should be barely visible from the front side and neatly crossed in the back. I hope you found this helpful, that you'll make good use of your new hemming abilities. Thank you so much for watching, and I shall talk to you all very soon.